There are obvious gaps and they need to be covered, and there are sort of technical ways to increase surveillance. The problem is, it's once you see that this type of nefarious activity is happening, what are the interdiction options? What are you able to do? And like I said, that we've started to interdict shadow vessels now. The UK did this recently. A variety of European allies have. But it's not just about surveillance. It's actually about what we can do when we see this type of activity happening.
Experts at the London-based think tank, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, believe drones flown over sensitive US military bases in Britain in November 2024 were probably launched from a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker docked in the UK. The drones are believed to have been flown from HAV Dolphin. It's a Russian crewed cargo vessel that was docked near Hull, or possibly another ship in the North Sea near Essex at the time. Among the primary targets was RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, which was being prepared to house US nuclear weapons. It comes as Russian attacks on the Ukrainian capital Kyiv overnight killed at least 21 people. It's been described as the most massive attack on the city by the mayor Vitaly Klitschko. Well, with us to discuss this further is the Senior Advisor for Defence at the D Group, Ed Arnold. Ed, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thank you for being with us. What do we know about these Russian drones? They were in, of course, airspace that they were not permitted to be. No drone is allowed to fly over sensitive airspace, such as it is over key military bases. What do we think these Russian drones, if that is the case, of course, were looking for? What were they able to do effectively?
Well, ultimately, these missions, and there were a variety of them, not just in the UK, but Europe. I mean, it is advanced reconnaissance. We've seen the Russians do a lot of seabed reconnaissance, mapping underwater cables, pipelines in the Baltic, the North Sea. This is starting to look into other sites of sensitive interest, which, as you mentioned, are starting to host a variety of weapons, including nuclear weapons. And that seems to be what the mission was looking like in terms of what they saw over Belgium as well.
Yeah, okay. I mean, how much do we know about what happened over UK air bases? Because there is a question here. I mean, it's all been revealed now in the fullness of time, but there is a question here about whether everything was done that could have been done to prevent an operation like this by Russia potentially.
Yes, and I think it is very difficult, and obviously this has been downplayed from a governmental point of view, and this has really been sort of all these data points brought together in a report by a think tank. But it just shows the massive challenge of surveilling every single tanker that is either Russian or Russian aligned in all of the geographies within Europe. There are obvious gaps, and they need to be covered, and there are sort of technical ways to increase surveillance. The problem is, it's once you see that this type of nefarious activity is happening, what are the interdiction options? What are you able to do? And like I said, that we've started to interdict shadow vessels now. The UK did this recently. A variety of European allies have. But it's not just about surveillance. It's actually about what we can do when we see this type of activity happening.
Yeah, the analysis of 144 incidents in more than a dozen countries over the 18-month period concluded that Russian intelligence had operated with substantial impunity. These drones, of course, well, the report went on to say, actually, that there were UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, operated with substantial impunity across European airspace. They believed that they were not operated remote. Well, they would have been operated remotely. That's how drones work. But they would be operated by manned personnel, is what the report seems to lean into here.
Yes, and I think ultimately the challenge for the Russian intelligence services is that there were mass expulsions from a variety of European countries after the large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So they need to find other ways of being able to conduct this sort of deep reconnaissance in a quite sort of, easy in terms of easing their capacity. The challenge for our intelligence services is obviously there's a lot of sites that have been mapped, and these are then become likely targets for sabotage at a future date. It's actually trying to understand what the Russian play is here, what sites may they go after, and how may they do that. And what we've seen in the last couple of years as well is that the Russians don't necessarily use their own special services. They've started to use criminal elements and other aligned elements within countries themselves, often paid by through cryptocurrencies. So it's actually a very different challenge for our intelligence agencies to keep abreast of.
Yeah, I mean, what is your opinion, Ed, on the fact that many of these bases have advanced technology? It was unable to track the drone signals or launch sites. It was down to this London-based think tank to identify where these drones probably came from. Surely that is a shortfall. If that technology is there and capable, why isn't it being used? Or perhaps is the level of tech at military bases, the ability to be able to identify threats such as drones, is that lacking?
Yes, I mean, this is a sort of a newer type of threat that we have seen, but we've actually seen Ukrainians use these type of tactics in terms of remotely piloted drones to target Russian air bases very far away from the front lines. So we kind of know that this is possible. And it's actually something that the Russians are probably learning from the Ukrainians. It's not just about base security either. It's about having forward reconnaissance assets. So, for example, in ports around the UK, but also when these types of things happen and that they become public, it's not always a bad thing, because it then forces the government to resource these bases adequately, in the same way as when Palestine Action attacked RAF Bryce Norton and threw some paint in some engines of some Voyagers, then suddenly there's a big review of RAF base security, and then that increases. So I think it's now on the UK and allies to say, well, this is a way that the Russians are conducting reconnaissance. How best can we mitigate that?
And look, give us your view on this huge attack by Russia on Kyiv overnight. At least 21 people have been killed so far. I mean, there are from Russia regularly launches, combined missile and drone attacks on Kyiv, but this was particularly big, and it came off the back, and we covered this on yesterday's show, of a warning from inside Zelensky's military that Putin was planning for this.
Yes, I mean, it's a large strike, and I think this just ultimately shows that Putin and Russia are not ready to come to the negotiating table when it comes to Ukraine. But unfortunately, while this was a very large strike, we have seen comparable strikes over the last 4 years. The Russians are happy to target civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, etc. And this is unfortunately just something that Ukraine is having to endure. And one of the really worrying things at the moment is, due to the war in the Middle East, a lot of US ammunition interceptors for air defense have been used up in the region. And now all of the new orders for all of these interceptors, again, are going to the US or partners in that region. Ukraine is at the bottom of the list now. So when more strikes happen, it just saturates effectively Ukrainian stockpiles, so that the Russian attacks could be actually far more effective in the future.
Yeah, good to speak to you, Ed. Thank you. Senior Advisor for Defence at the D Group. That is Ed Arnold. Good to have you with us.